We knew this was going to be a tough series for the Orioles in LA this week against the Dodgers, and they started it with a huge win on Tuesday night, but followed up with two kind of lifeless performances as they dropped 2 out of 3 in LA. I'll recap the 3 game series between the O's and the Dodgers coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, August 30th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the 3 game series this week between the Orioles and the Los Angeles Dodgers, as the O's, despite taking game 1, lost the next 2 and dropped 2 out of 3 against LA. I'll get you the what went right, what went wrong, and a shout out to a player for all 3 games of the series. We'll talk about the hot surge continuing for Ramon Urias, Cole Irvin at least doing his job, the bullpen pitching well, but the rotation overall having another tough series. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb and use code all lowercase lockedonmlb for a first deposit match up to $100. So if you're following along with the podcast this week, I've talked about it a few times, but just with my outside of this podcast work schedule and the fact that the Orioles are on the West Coast with 10 p.m. first pitches on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night, it is pretty much impossible to try and stay up and record and edit and post a podcast and go to bed and get enough sleep and go to work and come back and do it again. These West Coast trips during the week are tough. They are very, very tough. And so because of that, we did a couple of different things. Tuesday night, we did a live mailbag. And Wednesday night, we talked about the roster moves, Forrest Wall and Nick Anderson coming to Baltimore, Dylan Tate getting DFA'd. Make sure to check those out. But here on a Friday, I decided, hey, let's wait a little bit more towards Friday evening. Hopefully you are checking in and listening to this maybe before the Orioles game 1 between the O's and Rockies on Friday night. But either way, I still wanted to recap this entire Dodgers series because despite the fact that the O's lost the series, I didn't really talk much about any of the 3 games. And this is a potential World Series preview here in the regular season in August. Feels like a series I shouldn't completely skip over. So let's start with the one Orioles win in this series. That was Tuesday night after the O's had the off day Monday. They had split the 4 games against the Astros over the weekend. And the final score from game 1, Orioles 3 and Dodgers 2. And let's start with what went right on Tuesday night. And that was the Orioles bullpen. You could argue that was the best performance by the O's bullpen this season. When you combine the current state of the pen and how much it has struggled lately with the injuries it's dealing with and the ineffectiveness, with the situation, how Cole Irvin did not even complete 5 innings, and the fact that they were facing one of the best offenses in baseball in the Los Angeles Dodgers. And this Orioles bullpen, Matt Bowman, Cionel Perez, Yennier Cano, and Seranthony Dominguez combined for 4 2/3 scoreless innings, 2 hits, 4 Ks, and 1 walk from those 4 arms. And really, it started with Matt Bowman. Now, Cole Irvin, I don't know if you want to say had to start another game because this could still be Trevor Rogers in this spot, but Trevor Rogers was so ineffective. He's sent down to AAA. Irvin has to come up for a spot start when Zach Eflin gets injured, and then the O's just kept him around over Rogers and gave him the baseball again. And while he certainly was not great, he at least kept the O's in the game, and we'll talk about that. But Brandon Hyde pulled him when you needed to. He had faced the Dodgers lineup twice. He let him face the lefty Shohei Ohtani a 3rd time, and he did get Shohei to pop out for a huge first out in the 5th after he had allowed the 8 and 9 hitters to reach to start the inning. And then you're facing Mookie Betts and Teoscar Hernandez, a couple of big righties, and good decision by Hyde. Do not let Cole Irvin face those guys a 3rd time. So he goes into his bullpen, and it was well rested, right? The Orioles did have the day off on Monday to rest that full pen, but not like it had been pitching amazingly, although the Orioles bullpen had a really good 4-game series against the Astros over the weekend, and they continued it in this series specifically on Tuesday. And to go to Matt Bowman there in that spot. O's up 3-2, first and second, one out in the bottom of the fifth. It's not the highest leverage. That is the fifth inning, but you're facing 2, 3, 4 in that Dodger order. That's a spot that Burch Smith has been a little bit. That's a spot that Jacob Webb had been in a lot before he got injured. That's an old Danny Coulomb spot at times. Putting Matt Bowman in there tells me that although he's only been with the O's for a week at this point, Brandon Hyde has some trust in Matt Bowman, and Bowman delivered. He gets out of the jam and overall records 5 outs on just 15 pitches for the Orioles. Not only does he get out of the fifth, he finishes off the 6th 1-2-3 and does an amazing job to bridge the gap to the back end of the bullpen. And I know that when Bowman then came in on Thursday night, he was not nearly as effective and in not as big a spot in that game. And those were the first runs he had given up as an Oriole when he came in on Thursday. But still, just to go out there and not get any swing and miss, but have your stuff play well enough that you can get those outs, that was huge. And then the O's could turn it over to at least the guys that Hyde has some trust in. And CNL Perez was great. He retired all 4 batters, including a big strikeout of Shohei Ohtani. Yennier Cano did allow a hit, but got 2 big strikeouts. And really the only reliever that struggled was Seranthony Dominguez. He came in 3-2 lead, bottom of the 9th for a 1-run save, and he made things a little bit dicey. He gave up a hit. He walked a batter. The final ball was hit almost to the warning track, but settled into the glove of Colton Cowser. He got the save, and the O's somehow scoring 3 runs, getting 4 1/3 from their starter against the Dodgers. They win that game. That is all thanks to not only the Oriole bullpen, but you got to give credit. No, people don't want to, but you got to give credit to Brandon Hyde for pushing all the right buttons with his pitching changes in that game and only getting 13 outs from Cole Irvin and managing to hold a 1-run lead the entire time and win that game. Credit to the bullpen, credit to Hyde, just a fantastic job coming together when the offense was still not really sparking and winning that baseball game. Now, what went wrong? Well, that was the hitters not named Ramon Urias. Urias had another big swing, 2-run homer in the 5th inning, gave the Orioles a 3-2 lead at the time. I mean, Ramon's just been amazing. We'll talk about it coming up next as he had another big game on Wednesday night. But that was kind of it. I mean, Ryan O'Hearn did hit a solo homer in the 2nd inning to open the scoring, put the O's up 1-0. And it was nice to see that from O'Hearn, his first home run in over a month. Ryan O'Hearn hadn't homered since July 20th until he hit that home run on Tuesday night. So that's certainly good to see. But those 2 long balls, which accounted for the 3 Orioles runs, despite the O's having 7 hits overall, those were the only 2 extra base hits the Orioles had in the game. Those 2 plus singles from Cowser, Rutschman, Henderson. Who else had a single? Jimenez and Jackson Holiday. Those were your other singles. The O's did draw 5 walks. That was certainly nice to see. That's one of their higher totals of the season in terms of free passes. But they had a couple more chances to just extend that lead a little bit and get a big hit, and they couldn't do it. And you can't really be relying on Ramon Urias this much. But it was enough because the bullpen was so good, and it still makes you wonder a little bit. And a shout out? Well, a shout out goes to Cole Irvin. I talked about it a little bit, and I'm not saying he was good. When you're a starter and you pitch only 4 1/3 innings, I'm certainly not saying you're doing well. But 4 1/3 innings, 2 runs for him versus the Dodgers, especially how his season has played out, you will take that every single time, especially when you know you have a rested bullpen that got the day off Wednesday. Irvin gave you what he could, and surprisingly, it was good enough. And the 2 starts he's made since coming up against the Mets and now against the Dodgers, 2 pretty good offenses, but they certainly haven't been great. He hasn't even finished 5 innings in either of those starts. A guy, Irvin, who at one point in his career was not the highest ceiling guy, but was an innings eater. He can't really call him that anymore because he can't get through the order even close to a 3rd time. But when you look at what the O's were getting from Trevor Rogers, even though these starts have been 4 1/3 innings from Irvin, I think I'm ready to say they've both been better than what Rogers on average was giving to the O's. And that's kind of sad. And that's where, with the injuries, the Orioles starting rotation is at this point. And I don't want Cole Irvin to make another start. Right now, as I record, I believe the Orioles are still TBD for their Sunday starter in Colorado. That is the day that Zach Eflin is eligible to come off the injured list. Now, haven't heard much about him throwing, but he had kept saying when he got injured, and the Orioles had kept saying, hey, the hope is that he just spends the minimum 15 days on the injured list and then is ready to go. So that is the hope. But if he's not ready, Cole Irvin is starting a game at Coors Field on Sunday. We don't want that to happen. But if he has to, it's the O's best option right now, maybe. That stinks to say, but he's given them what he can, and it's been enough to keep the Orioles in ball games. I mean, he's not missing bats. He's doubling and tripling up on his curveball, which has been by far his best pitch all year. He threw 23 curveballs. That was his most used pitch on the day. And the final line, while kind of ugly, 4 1/3, 5 hits, 2 runs, 3 Ks, 2 walks on 60 pitches. It's like, keep him in the ball game against a Dodgers order that should be crushing Cole Irvin, and you'll get a shout out from me on this podcast. And the O's, I mean, that was pulling a rabbit out of their hat to win that game. And you thought, okay, you've stolen this one. Now you've got Corbin Burnes on the mound, and I know he has struggled, but maybe you just got to find a way to win one more game, and you've got a series win in LA. Unfortunately, Wednesday night was not the night they would do that. Corbin Burnes was definitely better than he's been over the last few starts, but still had his struggles as the O's lost game 2, and I'll break it down coming up after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Liquid IV. When you're taking in America's pastime, don't forget to hydrate with Liquid IV's Popsicle Firecracker flavor, a surefire summer hit. Get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. Because baseball and summer, they go together like Liquid IV and indulgent hydration. I am a huge water drinker. I am drinking water all day, whether it's the summer, whether it's the winter. I am trying my best to stay hydrated, but even I miss the mark sometimes. That is where I can just turn to Liquid IV. And listen, it's not some sort of like disgusting thing you put in your drink and it tastes terrible. It tastes good. It actually tastes really, really good. And I can enjoy a beverage like that is hydrating me. All you do is pour, and live more. One stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. So no more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. So the O's somehow got out of there with a pretty impressive 3-2 win over the Dodgers in game 1 of this series on Tuesday night. Unfortunately, despite taking an early lead, they could not replicate it in game 2 on Wednesday, as in that one, the Orioles fell to the Dodgers 6-4 to even this series up at 1 game apiece. And let's start with what went right from Wednesday. And I know I already talked about him, but honestly, it was Ramon Urias again who went right for the Orioles. Another big day at the office at the plate for Urias. He goes 2 for 3 with a single, a double, and 2 RBIs. His big swing was a 2-run double in the top of the second inning off of Walker Buehler that put the O's up 2-1. They had a 3-run second that also involved the James McCann RBI single to put them up 3-1 in this game. And that was not completely, but was almost it for their offense, unfortunately, in this one. But Urias just continues to swing the bat well. And you look at his statistics at this point, this was heading into play on Thursday for Ramon. 150 WRC plus since the All-Star break. 149 WRC plus in August. 247 WRC plus in the last 2 weeks. Remember, WRC plus is kind of an all-encompassing statistic offensively that takes into account park factors and everything, where 100 is league average. That is how good he has been over this stretch since Jordan Westburg has gone out with that broken hand. And we know Westburg's been taking some grounders and drills, but all of that with his right hand behind his back, just using his non-injured hand. And the Orioles hope at some point late in September, they will get Westburg back into that lineup. But right now, I've said it many times over the past couple of weeks, Ramon Urias has third base on lock and has been the Orioles' best hitter. As I'm recording here on Friday afternoon, the Orioles lineup was posted. Ramon Urias is batting 5th on Friday night for the Orioles against the Rockies. That's how good he has been swinging the bat lately. Now, it's a little bit of an odd lineup against the lefty. Ryan Mountcastle's on the IL, so you got less guys than usual in the lineup. Adley Rutschman's getting a day off, but still, Ramon Urias is hitting 5th. And guess what? He's been the O's best hitter, and he deserves it. And that is what he continues to do. I will keep talking about Ramon Urias until someone else can match his production. There's plenty of guys with the talent to surpass his production in this Oriole lineup, but he's kind of carrying the O's offense. And the O's are struggling offensively. You can't really be carried by Ramon Urias. They scored a total of 10 runs in this 3-game series against the Dodgers, against not exactly their best starting pitchers. But that's where we are. And just, yeah, Ramon Urias, keep it up, kid. Like, please keep it up. What went wrong? Well, unfortunately, it was Corbin Burnes again. Now, let's be fair to Corbin Burnes. This was a much better start than we've seen really those last 3 times out there where he was just kind of a disaster. Still, 6 runs scored against him over 5 innings. Now, his defense completely let him down. 1 error from Ramon Urias. 1 was kind of a tough error on Gunnar Henderson. I get why it was called an error, but could have gone either way. That let another run score. And there was an error on Urias that then kind of led to the floodgates opening and a 4-run third for the Dodgers against Burnes. But he also has the stuff to be able to, after that Urias error, pull things back together and not give up the big inning. And he was the one, despite the fact that the final line says 5 innings, 5 hits, 6 runs, 1 earned, 4 Ks, no walks, and 2 homers on 94 pitches. He had the ability to not have the 6 runs, even though 5 of them were unearned, come across the board against him. And it was just, it's still hard to parse. Now, the big plus was he did not walk anyone. He's been having some walk issues as well as some issues allowing runs over the last few starts. Not walking anyone over 5 innings is a really good sign. But the command issues were more so in the zone. He wasn't spraying the ball out of the strike zone. He was just leaving too many pitches, especially breaking pitches over the middle of the plate. And the big swing of the game was the Teoscar Hernandez 3-run homer in the third that gave the Dodgers the lead. And that was just curveball, curveball, curveball. And then he hung a curveball again. And Hernandez, who's had an amazing year with the Dodgers, just blasted that ball into the left field seats for a 3-run shot. And I cover a lot of pitching on this show, and I like diving into pitching. It's really hard to tell what exactly is the big issue with Corbin Burnes, because sometimes you can tell small issues and he having small struggles. Even though he was better in this start, he's still, I would consider, having big struggles in the month of August, and I don't quite know what it is. I've looked through the pitch data. There's not much that's very different, velocity-wise, movement-wise. And another great baseball podcast, Rates and Barrels, that I highly recommend you listen to over at The Athletic, Derek Van Riper and Eno Saris. They do some fantasy baseball, but also some pitching breakdowns, especially when they have Trevor May, the former reliever, on their show as well. And the 3 of them were on their episode on Thursday, breaking down the struggles of Corbin Burnes lately. And all 3 of them were like, yeah, we've looked at the data and it's nothing about pitch movement or pitch velocity. That all looks pretty much the same as it has been for the dominant version of Corbin Burnes. And Eno's take was that it's just pitch selection and sequencing. And that's something that should be easy to fix because you're not trying to get your stuff back. It's just when and where you're throwing certain pitches can be something much easier to change. So that's definitely a bright spot here for Burnes. And we know all year he's made more of an effort to pitch more to contact. He's given up some strikeouts, but it's allowed him for most of the year to get deeper into games and eat more innings for the Orioles, something that he really wants to do and is really proud of, even going into his free agency year. But now he's not missing bats and he's hanging pitches. So instead of 5 innings, 10 strikeouts, he was getting 6 or 7 innings, 6 strikeouts before with 1 or 2 runs allowed. But now it's 5 innings, 5 or 6 runs allowed with 4 or 5 strikeouts. And that is where you do not want to be. And that is what we have seen from Corbin Burnes these last few starts. So hopefully he can take that slider that's been really good, but he's struggling with command. He can take that curveball, which he commands better, but maybe leaves a few just hanging over the plate, and he can find out what's going on with his cutter command and just sequence his pitches better and get confidence in those pitches to dominate, because it's still in there. Like, I don't think Corbin Burnes is cooked. We saw way too much in the first 4 months of the season to think that the month of August means he's done. And I have full confidence he will pull it back together and lead this team down the stretch in September and into the postseason. But it's kind of rough to watch right now. And the worst part is, with a lot of other pitchers who don't have the pedigree and the history and the Cy Young Award that Corbin Burnes has, it's a little easier to dive into because they have tells when they struggle, and they've all had patches of struggling, and you know what's going on. Like, you know what's going on when Grayson Rodriguez is struggling. There's a little bit off with his mechanics. He's spraying the ball high, and higher. He is not trusting his off-speed pitches. We've seen that from Grayson Rodriguez. Guys like Dean Kramer, when the velocity is fluctuating and he can't get all 3 of his fastballs over for strikes, then he starts to get hit really hard because he's not a soft contact merchant. Or even a guy like Albert Suarez, who can't get that fastball in the zone, so he has to go to his secondary pitches, and that can hurt him. With Corbin Burnes, it's like The stuff is so good, and we haven't seen him as much. It's just hard to pin down what's happening when he's this bad because he's always just been so good. So it's still a little bit of a mystery. On one end, it makes you think it's just a weird stretch and he'll hop out of it quickly. And on the other end, it's like, could it be something so under the surface that we can't even see it? And that worries you about the struggles continuing. I'm not sure where I fall in. What I am looking forward to is this. Corbin Burnes' next start is most likely going to be on Monday at home against the Chicago White Sox. I cannot think of a better get-right start than at home against this current version of the Chicago White Sox. So hopefully that can at least be a start that gets his confidence back and he can roll through September. That would be the hope here. And the shout out for Wednesday's game, well, that goes to Gregory Soto and Craig Kimbrell. And I get they were pitching in low leverage situations where they've been much better as of late. The Orioles were trailing 6-4 in the bottom of the 7th when Gregory Soto went 1-2-3 with a strikeout, and the bottom of the 8th when Craig Kimbrell went 1-2-3 against this Dodgers order. And it's not an end-all be-all that they are fixed. But every time Soto and Kimbrell go out there and throw a good inning and put up a 0 and look like their former dominant selves, they get closer and closer to be able to be used in somewhat close to a leverage situation for Brandon Hyde out of this bullpen. And the Orioles desperately need to be able to use at least one of Craig Kimbrell or Gregory Soto in leverage. They're not there yet, but maybe the zeros that they threw up there on Wednesday. I'm not saying it's going to happen because we've seen them both do well in low leverage and then go to high leverage and get killed again. But maybe, just maybe, these are signs for both of these guys that things can turn at some point this year, because we're grasping at straws on them because the O's need one of them to be good. And unfortunately right now, even with it going a little better lately, neither of them are good enough to trust in the late part of a game. So the Dodgers won Wednesday. They even up the series. It's all on the backs of Cade Povich and the O's offense on Thursday. And unfortunately, Povich wasn't great. The O's offense wasn't great. The O's ended up falling in the rubber game Thursday. Tell you what happened to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. For me, the most fun and exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. How do you play Prize Picks? Well, all you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks. With as little as 4 correct picks, you could turn $10 into 1,000. And listen, we at this point are less than a week away from the NFL season kicking off. Chiefs and Ravens next Thursday. And you can take a look at Lamar Jackson more or less on passing yards, on rushing yards that Prize Picks gives you. You just pick more or less, you get it right, you win money. And for me, when I put in those entries, it takes like a minute. It is so quick and so easy. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed at Prize Picks. Run your game. So the O's still had a chance to win the series on Thursday. Unfortunately, they dropped that one as well, falling 6-3 to the Dodgers in the rubber match at Dodger Stadium on Thursday night. Orioles now 77-58 on the year as they head to Colorado to take on the Rockies this weekend for a 3-game set. Luckily, you got to give a shout out to the Washington Nationals, who took 2 of 3 from the Yankees in DC this week, allowing the O's to stay right there in the division. They are a game and a half back of the Yankees in the AL East heading into the weekend. But let's start with what went right in the O's loss on Thursday. That was Colton Cowser delivering for the only big swing by this Orioles offense. Cowser getting the O's back into the game with a 3-run homer in the top of the 5th inning off of Bobby Miller, one of just 2 hits the O's had against Miller, and one of only 4 hits the Orioles offense had in this entire game. And a cool milestone for Cowser, who hit his 20th home run of the season. A 3-run shot made it 5-3, 106 off the bat, 397 feet. Took a fastball and drove it into the seats in left center field. Just a really good looking swing from Cowser. And we know how great he was in April We know how bad he was in May and June, and he turned it on and had an amazing July, and he hasn't been as amazing, but still, heading into play Friday, a 112 WRC plus in August, despite a season high for a month, 33% strikeout rate this month from Cowser. He's still been a good hitter. And when you combine it with the fact that he's got 11 outs above average in the outfield, 9 of them in left field, he's been, you could argue, the best defensive left fielder in Major League Baseball this season, playing a really tough and large left field half the time at Camden Yards. He's just been great out there. That all combines to, you look at 20 home runs, leading all rookies. You look at 120 WRC plus. You look at the defense. That's why he's worth 3.6 wins, according to FanGraphs WAR. And that is why he is still, despite a very roller coaster season and some other good candidates like Mason Miller and Luis Heel and Willie Abreu, he is still the betting favorite to win the American League Rookie of the Year award. And if he does, not only does he get the hardware and get the recognition, the Orioles get a PPI draft pick because Cowser was on the opening day roster as a rookie and then won the Rookie of the Year award. Again, if he does, still got a month to go here to secure that spot. But he's been really, really good. And yes, it's not consistency that's Cowser's game. It's very up and down. But you'll take how good he's been this season. And I'm still not convinced he's the best leadoff hitter for this team, but it is the spot he's been in for basically the last month for the O's. And maybe Rutschman goes back there. Maybe Henderson goes back there. Maybe if Jackson Holiday turns it on, he gets a little bit of a test there. He's not leading off against lefties. That's Austin Slater's job. But against righties, most nights you see Cowser in the number one spot. And I don't know if in a playoff game Cowser hits leadoff, but that's where he is now. It's working out enough. And Colton Cowser's been a really important part of this team this year, and it's cool to see him when he takes big swings. Now, what went wrong, besides the rest of the offense, of course, was Cade Povich was not his alter ego of Slim this week. Good story in the Baltimore Banner this week about Cade Povich having an alter ego when he goes out on the mound, being kind of a quieter guy off the field, but on the field taking on the alter ego of Slim and going out there and being more assertive, more directive, calling his pitches on the mound, trying to attack hitters. And it's worked at times when he came up and made that great spot start against the Red Sox. And other times it doesn't work. And the Dodgers were just basically all over Cade Povich on Thursday night. It was not pretty. For the rookie lefty, 3 1/3 innings, 5 runs, 10 hits, 3 Ks, and a walk on 87 pitches. Povich recorded 10 outs, and it took him 87 pitches to do so, and he allowed 10 hits. It was not great. It wasn't command out of the zone. Again, it's just one walk, but it's just spraying the ball throughout the zone, giving up hard contact. I mean, his worst start of the year clearly was that debacle in Oakland, but this was probably the second worst start of the season for Cade Povich, and he's been thrown into a situation it's almost impossible for him. He deserved to have his MLB debut this year, but he was not expecting to be in the rotation for this long. The O's have a full 5-man starting rotation on their injured list right now. That is why not just Cole Irvin that I talked about earlier, but Cade Povich is sitting in this rotation. And again, Zach Eflin hopefully will come back this Sunday or at the very least next week. Povich might stay in the rotation. There's a chance that Cole Irvin is DFA'd. Eflin takes that spot back, and it's still Povich. Now, it might be easier because you can just option Povich, but even with the struggles, he could still stay in the rotation. That's kind of where the O's are at right now. And so he's got to embrace Slim. It's something I've seen work before for other pitchers, especially in college baseball. It's a big thing, but man, it's a tough spot for Povich. You almost can't blame him. It's like he shouldn't be in this spot pitching in these games, and yet off of necessity he is. So if he keeps getting chances, hopefully it can improve. Very similar to Burnes. If he gets another start, it should be at home against the White Sox. That should certainly help him out. But I don't know where you go from here. These guys who are forced into this spot, they got to pitch better. But the shout out does go to the Oriole bullpen. Now, they did give up a run. Matt Bowman, after the great outing Tuesday, inning and a third, a run. He walked 3 batters, although he did strike out 2 and threw 42 pitches. But we saw another 1-2-3 inning from Gregory Soto. Again, it was in lower leverage, but you'll take it. Birch Smith has really been bad lately. We got an inning and 2/3 scoreless out of Birch Smith, which was good to see. That is all good stuff. And it all combined, remember, the Orioles bullpen only gave up 2 runs in that 4-game series against the Astros, 2 earned runs. It was those back-to-back homers that Birch Smith allowed. In this series against the Dodgers, another really good offense, they allowed just 1 earned run, and they had to cover 12 1/3 innings in this 3-game series. They got starts of 4 1/3, 5 innings, and 3 1/3. And this bullpen's against one of the best and scariest offenses in baseball that, to be fair, didn't have Freddie Freeman this week. allowed 1 earned run in 12 and a third innings, 6 hits, 9 strikeouts, 4 walks. This is a bullpen that had all kind of leaks, all kind of holes, all kind of struggles coming into a 7-game stretch against the Astros and Dodgers, and they have been as good as they've been all season in this 7-game stretch. It's very, very impressive, and that's without Jacob Webb and without Danny Coulomb and with no trust in Gregory Soto and Craig Kimbrell to get them big outs, and they have still found a way. Now, they've gone 3-4 record-wise in that stretch, and you'd like to be better. They're not pitching the most high-leverage innings, but this is still a good thing. And at worst, even if the O's offense doesn't completely gel, and even if the O's rotation stays injured, if the bullpen can pitch better, they can make their way through this September and still find a way to win the AL East. That'll do it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed the recap of that series. Again, Orioles and Rockies this weekend. If you're listening just as this comes out, it's an 8:40 start on Friday. Albert Suarez against Austin Gomber, the lefty of the Rockies. Rockies at 1585, not a very good team, but crazy stuff does happen at Coors. These next 2 series, though, at the Rockies, home versus the White Sox, enough crazy stuff happens at Coors Field that you just build in 1 loss in this series. But if you're serious about winning this division, you need to go 5-1 in these next 6 games. Basically, you need to take 2 from the Rockies and sweep the White Sox at home. Anything worse is a disappointment in these next 6. Game 2 at 8:10 on Saturday, Dean Kramer versus an interesting young righty in Ryan Feltner. And then finally on Sunday, Cal Quantrill, who didn't end up getting traded. The righty goes for the Rockies, and the Orioles are TBD. If Eflin's healthy, he'll return. If not, it's probably another Cole Irvin start. And then I will be back on Monday, recapping all 3 games between the Orioles and the Rockies. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.